It's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. I thank you for being here for the special occasion to honor one of our graduates and to learn more about her work and what she's doing. But before I introduce her, I'd like to say a little bit about the seminary in case you might be visiting. Maybe you've never set foot in here. I've met one or two of you who haven't and are kind of in awe of the building. It is an interesting building. We've been here since, I think we're celebrating 20 years. Was it built in 1979? Or sorry, not 20 years, 40 years. And so this building is a Richard Meyer building. We were originally on the Yukon Law School buildings, and you can look at those at some point. Our history is a long history. 1834, Hartford Seminary started, and we have a number of firsts that we're really proud of. In 1889, you probably saw it on the slideshow, the first seminary in the country to open its doors to women. We have been doing interreligious work for a long time. Yes, that's a really great thing. In the country, the first seminary in the country to welcome women. And really a leading seminary in terms of doing interreligious work. So as early as 1893, a professor here felt it was important to start studying Arabic and Islamic studies. And doing that because of some mission work, but also if we are going to engage people around the world, we really need to take seriously their culture and who they are, the language they speak. And that has grown into a love of interreligious relations and dialogue. And we today have the first Center for Muslim-Christian Relations called the McDonald Center, and there are a number of other things. But at any rate, we're proud of our heritage. We're proud of who we are today. We're a leading graduate seminary for interfaith studies. And I encourage you to think about auditing a course or taking an online course with us. It doesn't cost a lot to audit a course. If you want to do a master's or degree or a doctoral degree, you're welcome to look at those as well. I just was looking through our course offerings. We have things like gender, power, and women being offered right now. We have another course. How many of you are familiar with the term the nuns? Not the N-U-Ns, but the N-O-N-Es, those who have no religious affiliation. We have a course right now called Nuns Religion. Very interesting. You should look into that. Spirituality in a Quantum Universe, Contemporary Religion and Public Life. And then two online courses kind of drew my attention. One is Introduction to Islam for Non-Muslims. Maybe you're feeling like, I don't know much about Islam, and I want to go into this with, especially as a non-Muslim. And then we also have another online course, Images of Jesus in Christian and Muslim Sacred Writings. So kind of looking at the images of Jesus from both of those traditions. Those are online courses. If you sign up in the next week, our ad drop period ends next week. So if you really want to do that, sign up now. All right, that's the end of my my stump speech. It does give me great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, the Reverend Dr. Tracy Mehr-Muska. D-Min is an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church USA. She is a board-certified chaplain with the Association of Professional Chaplains and has served as an interfaith chaplain in a psychiatric hospital, men's prison, trauma hospital, and hospice. She currently serves as the university chaplain at Wesleyan University, where she provides one-on-one spiritual and emotional support for students of any or no faith background, and develops programs and events to help students grow spiritually, emotionally, and psychosocially. As part of her doctoral research at Hartford Seminary, right here, Reverend Mehr-Muska developed curriculum for building resilience designed for interfaith audiences and currently leads interfaith retreats and workshops. We're delighted to have you here tonight, Tracy. Dr. Mehr-Muska, Reverend Mehr-Muska. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage. Thank you. And
I'm so happy to see you here. I can't even tell you how much I appreciate each one of you. So I'm happy especially to be doing this here at Hartford Seminary because this place has truly educated me, inspired me, and affirmed me. And it feels fitting that my book talk is here in this room. But then I'm thinking to myself, a book talk? I don't even know what that is. So I Googled it, and it said, a book talk is a short presentation about a book with the goal of convincing other people to read it. And I think my publisher might say also to buy it. But it also says this, a book talk, the goal is to engage the listeners and to present a fun, exciting, and even suspenseful commercial for your book. Wow, okay, so a fun, exciting, and suspenseful commercial. That's what you're here for, right? Well, fun, exciting, and suspenseful might be pushing it a little, and it's definitely not a commercial, but I do hope that this time is useful and that you do glean something new from it. I hope that you leave here with a spirit of hope and a heart ready for renewal, with the intention to celebrate your gifts and with a plan to grow in resilience. To do that, I thought I'd first talk about some of the lessons learned from this project, call it my sermon for the night. Then I'll share some of the strategies about building your resilience that I've learned from research and from life that I hope can be useful. So the sermon. So there's a long-running joke that every good Presbyterian sermon has 3 points and a poem. So my 3 points for tonight. First, the importance of community. Second, the strength of the human spirit. And finally, the value of honoring our stories. So first, the community. Nothing is an individual effort. The number of people that participated in the planning, research, and writing of this book is beyond measure. Just to name a few, my seminary professors who inspired and coached me, my parents and sister and neighbors who watched my kids so I could write. I told you I might cry during this. I warned people on Facebook. The brave women who willingly shared their stories and made themselves vulnerable and allowed me to tell their stories in the book. My spiritual director, Joanne, who helped me unpack a lot of the shame and regret that I had been living with. And even the barista at Hartford Baking Company. Don't underestimate the role she played. In one way or another, each person here in this room had something to do with this book becoming a real, tangible thing. So thank you. But the real lesson extends far beyond just the writing of this book. Yeah, the book wouldn't have been possible without this community of support, but really, my life would have not been possible without the community of support. While our culture tends to celebrate individual accomplishments and the strength and resilience of singular people, I would love for us all to celebrate and recognize that there is no obligation to do this thing called life alone. It's not more heroic or more legitimate. True success and joy requires us to depend on one another unapologetically. Community is essential. So second, I learned about our individual and collective capacities to persevere. Many of us have hardships, medical conditions, hauntings from our past, or crippling fears that we live with every day. Each one of us has a story, and our stories are full of beauty, pain, triumph, and ultimately resilience. For years, I minimized my story. I spent too much time dwelling on the ugly and regrettable parts of it. This project helped me see and celebrate the strength that was required of me. It helped me learn to be gentler with myself. So maybe you came here tonight because you feel like you could use a little more resilience. Or maybe you're related to me and you felt obligated. But still, really, this project helped me realize that we are each more resilient than we realize and more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. The fact that each one of you made it here in this moment at this time is a sign of your strength, perseverance, and general awesomeness. The journey that brought you here to this moment likely had its ups and downs, joys and traumas, achievements and failures, but here we are. And as I look out, I see faces full of life and beauty and hope. I would literally like each of you, and I'm going to make you do this right now, I would like you to pat yourselves on the back right now and say, good job for getting here tonight. And if you don't mind looking at your neighbor, say, hey, you did it, you got here tonight. It does. Sometimes it feels momentous even just to do something that's in our calendar already. But here we are. We are rock stars. Our stories are important, and that is my third point. While I share some of my own story in this book, each chapter is anchored with the story of one of my female academy classmates from the Coast Guard Academy who really embodied that specific character of resilience that I address. I received a gift each time I spoke with these women as they opened up their hearts and their lives to me, sharing their deepest moments of difficulty and reflecting on what helped them survive. From the untimely deaths of loved ones to deadly house fires to stillbirth. While the stories were at times heart-wrenching, the strength of the human spirit was so abundantly visible and so emphatically alive. The ways in which these women use these life experiences to become stronger, kinder, and wiser people is so incredibly inspirational to me. After each interview, I felt completely blessed. For a long while, I buried my military service records in the basement, my story, hoping my kids never asked too many questions, wondering if they would lose respect for me for knowing the unpleasant parts, wondering if they would judge me. This project helped me learn that our stories aren't always pretty, but they are beautiful. In my own life, my kids, their lives may not always go as planned. They might disappoint themselves. They might not reach a goal that they had dreamt about. But like me, they're children of God, and they are beloved. Their stories matter, and their stories are beautiful. But I didn't write this only for my kids. Early on, my spiritual director, Joanne, she said, I don't care if nobody wants to publish this book. You have to write this book for you. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, Joanne. And I laughed to myself. And I said, there is no possible way I'm dedicating any more time to this project until someone tells me I should, namely a publisher with a contract. But she was totally right, which shouldn't have been a surprise because she was right about a lot of things over the last 10 years. So from the moment I finished this book, before any editor even laid eyes on it, I knew it was an essential part of my continuing journey of healing. So I invite you to do yourself that same favor. I hope each one of you might find your own voice and tell your own story. Tell your stories and not just the good parts to friends, in a blog, to your kids, in your journal, in a memoir, or in your ethical will, on Instagram, wherever. Let yourself be vulnerable. And when you allow others to see the beauty and strength in you, they're more likely to see it in themselves. So in keeping with the unofficial Presbyterian protocol, I would like to end this preachy part of my talk with a verse from Langston Hughes' poem. I went down to the river, I sat down on the bank. I tried to think but couldn't, so I jumped in and sank. I came up once and hollered. I came up twice and cried. If that water hadn't have been so cold, I might have sunk and died. Our sorrows and fears and regrets are like cold water. They help remind us that we are alive and capable, that we need one another, that we are resilient, and that our stories, good and bad, make us the complex, caring, unique, beautiful people that we are. Our stories empower us to be effective stewards of compassion, empathy, and kindness. May it be so. So now we're going to transition to the second part of the fun, exciting, and suspenseful commercial, some strategies about building resilience. So I think it makes sense to start, let me just make sure I've got this going on, with a definition. So the thing about this project, it's really based on an important premise that resilience is not something we are born with or not born with. It is a set of characteristics that we can cultivate. We can become more resilient. So resilience is a simple set of characteristics that can be continually cultivated to enable us to be emotionally, cognitively, and spiritually prepared and positively transformed by trauma, disappointment, and difficulty. So there are things that resilience isn't. Resilience is not about fixing. Oftentimes, again, our culture, we really love to fix things. We like things to look pretty. We like things to be right. Oftentimes, we are just living in the mess. We're not going to make it pretty. We're not going to fix it. So I want to get us away from thinking of resilience in that way. The second, as I mentioned, is it's not predetermined by our DNA. It's something each of us can learn. So we look at some people and we're like, oh, that person is so naturally resilient. Well, maybe they had some more opportunities to cultivate some of these characteristics Maybe intentionally, maybe not. But now we have an opportunity to look at some of these characteristics and start working on some of them. And that's what I think is so exciting about this. Resilience does not minimize or deny suffering. And in a few minutes, I'll talk about toxic positivity. Well, resilience, it's this real thing. The thing is, we can be grief-stricken and resilient. We can feel like we are having trouble getting through day to day, and we can be getting through day to day. It may not be seamless. It may not be completely effortless, but it doesn't mean we are not resilient. The other thing about resilience, which is kind of disappointing perhaps, is that it's not something that's ever achieved. It's not like one day you say, oh, I'm resilient now. I like to think of resilience as a continuum. And sometimes we're feeling super strong. We're feeling ready to face the world. We can do anything. And sometimes we feel really not capable and really vulnerable. So sometimes circumstances that are out of our control might move us somewhere on this continuum. But I feel like with some of these exercises and practices, we can kind of continually move ourselves closer to the stronger end of that resilience continuum. And again, it's completely dependent on community. We do often think of resilience as an individual thing. That person is resilient. Well, I hate that idea, because to me, there's no such thing as individual resilience. We're only as capable as our community of support is, in my opinion. And then again, like, building it is not a burden, but it's an opportunity. This is something that actually can be super fun. And as I'm working, so my friends last week said, oh, we're going to Bar Taco for lunch. I was like, oh, social connections, that's one of my resilience characteristics. I'm going to make this lunch a priority. And so this is actually not a burden. This can be a super fun thing to do, is to work on your resilience. So what are these characteristics? I won't keep you in suspense any longer. I thought it would be fun to try to make them catchy. So I started them all with P's. I did not come up with these 7 characteristics. The scholars looked at resilient people and found a whole bunch of common characteristics between people that are resilient. And so I just looked at them, kind of pulled them together, and thought what was most relevant in my own personal life. So there may be some P's that are not on this list, or maybe your word doesn't even begin with P. But the point is, here's a good place to start, but there may be some that you think of that aren't included. So people, positivity, pliability, problem solving, piety, it's really spiritual and or religious, connections, beliefs, and practices, but that doesn't begin with P, so it's piety. Perseverance and purpose. So I'm going to just spend a moment to go through each of these. And if you're curious to learn more, I do happen to have one chapter dedicated to each of these. So that's kind of how the structure came about. So people, building social connections, that consistently among resilient people, they have connections with others. Again, this is like number one. It keeps showing up in all of the research and literature. And the relationships can be with individuals, they can be with communities, role models, mentors, or mentees. So again, this is a fun one to work on. Ask your friend to go get coffee with you. Write thank you letters to people who you care about. Write letters to anyone. Join clubs and associations of things that are interesting to you. Connect with a support group or a counselor or therapist or spiritual director. These are all things that can literally build our resilience. And what I want to emphasize is that each of these 7 Ps, these are things we want to do in advance of maybe a trauma or hardship happening to us, kind of like a fire drill. We don't want to say in the middle of a hardship, maybe I should try yoga. You want to have these things kind of part of our system, part of our life, part of our everything, so we can rely on them more easily. It's never too late to start working on resilience, but I'm inviting you to take it on sooner than later. So, so these social connections. And even things like I follow on Facebook the Mighty Girl website, and there's always a story of some heroic woman who did something, and it lightens my spirit. It makes me feel like I can take on the world myself. So these are all ways that you can connect. A second really essential characteristic of resilience is positivity. And this one, I feel like half the people are usually like, yeah, positivity, and half the people roll their eyes. Because maybe you've heard about it too much, or maybe you think it feels contrived or artificial. But genuinely, positivity makes a difference. In fact, you may have heard on the radio, recent research showed that people with a more optimistic outlook actually live longer. They are 50 to 70% more likely to reach the age of 85. So positivity helps your resilience, and it might help you live a little longer. And I feel like positivity is related to how we view the past, the present, and the future, and also how we look at others and ourselves. And so I really feel like this characteristic can be learned. People can practice positivity, and it becomes second nature. And that's what's kind of exciting about this. Really practicing thinking positive, being mindful when you catch yourself not thinking positive, really can help change your script and how you think about things. So toxic positivity is this idea that it ignores the pain. It doesn't acknowledge the feelings. I think we can be positive and realistic at the same time. So some of the toxic positivity things you may have heard. Oh, she lived a good life. Oh, you'll get married again. You'll get over it. These are things that people say to try to speed us through the grief, but really, positivity is just saying, this is incredibly painful. I trust and hope that tomorrow will be better. That's a more realistic kind of positive outlook. So you can be sad and worried and afraid and drained and grief-stricken and still be positive. So the third is pliability. And this, I keep making fun of myself because I keep saying, oh, this one's my favorite. I say that about all of them because I do love them all. But when I was working for hospice, a social worker said something to me that really stuck with me. He said, the people who seem to do the best in terms of coping with the loss of someone they love are the people who are most adaptable to change. And that is because unwanted things that happen in our life, hardships, trauma, always come with unwanted or unexpected change. And so the trick of living into that new reality and not wishing it were the same as it were is a huge piece of resilience. And this is something I know I work on a lot. And again, this is something that we can practice. For some people, it comes really natural, and for others of us, we have to practice it. And then there's problem solving. I tell people often that this research on resilience has really changed the way I parent. And one of the areas most particular that has happened is with problem solving. And I realize the ways in which I solve my children's problems all the time. I make sure they have 15 sweatshirts stashed in 15 different locations so they never get cold. I make sure that their lunches are packed perfectly. And I'm realizing that they're not being called upon to solve their own problems. So we've been trying to make some changes in our house. And I remember my son last year lost a spelling list. And we're like, okay, what can we do about this? And then he kind of talked about it, thought about it. Oh, well, my friend has the same teacher. Maybe he has the list. So instead of me just saying, oh, well, don't worry, I'll just text Chris and I'll find the list, I invited him to walk through that journey with me. So this is something we can do for ourselves. We can practice solving problems and being mindful of that, because problem solving is a huge part of resilience, because change accompanies hardship, and often change requires us to solve problems and learn how to do things in a new way. So, piety. Again, this is not specifically religious by any means. Religious and or spiritual beliefs, practices, and communities. This has come up, especially in children, to be a real factor in resilience. And again, can be one that takes a little more effort. Like we have flag football at 10:30 or at 11, and church started at 10:15. So we said last week, okay, well, let's go to the first 20 minutes of church. So I know that building those relationships at church are important. It takes effort. It takes me really to be mindful of that characteristic of resilience and want to build that resilience characteristic and make it a priority. Because often, many of these things don't necessarily come naturally. We have to be mindful of it. And again, when I go, I'm like, okay, I'm building my resilience. We're making new friends. We have a support system. many of these P's are, as you can see, kind of related to one another. So the piety is a huge piece. And I love the story I heard, you might remember, with the soccer team that was trapped in the cave underwater. You may not have heard that the coach was actually raised in an orphanage where he was taught meditation. And those boys spent a lot of time meditating. It was a gift to those boys, really potentially helped save lives. And were it not for the fact that that coach had been nurturing this practice, it wouldn't have been something that would have been able to really be a lifesaver. So these are practices we, again, can practice in advance and put in our toolbox. And so having a sense of purpose is also hugely essential. Sometimes our sense of purpose comes from a pre-existing identity, and sometimes a sense of purpose might come right out of that tragedy or trauma itself. I think first of a friend who did have a stillborn child, and her sense of purpose as a parent to her older child helped her persevere through that. She knew she needed to be there for that older child. She knew she needed to get help. She knew she needed to survive and not relinquish herself to the grief, and that helped her persevere. In another case, I think of Mothers United Against Violence. It's a Hartford-based group of men and women who fight against gun violence and fight for to protect people against gun violence. Many of the members of that group are mothers of people who were slain by gun violence. So their sense of purpose grew out of their grief. So either way, it helps people put one foot in front of the other. It helps people realize that there is something worth living for. There's something worth persevering for. And then finally, perseverance. We can't really get through trauma and difficulty unless we literally get through trauma or difficulty. The thing about perseverance is it does require us sometimes to be uncomfortable. And this is another thing. I think when we do things like go backpacking or go camping, you're like, I'm getting attacked by mosquitoes and I'm really cold and I miss my bed. It helps us become sturdier. It helps us become more able to persevere. So again, these can be fun things that we're doing to help bolster our resilience. But physical fitness is very, very closely connected with resilience as well, and also the mental endurance. So these are things we can work on and cultivate. So the 7 P's of resilience. What I would love to do is take just a few moments. I would like you to think to yourselves about something that you have accomplished, something that you're really proud of. And I want you to take a moment and look at the 7 P's and see which of those P's went into that. And the reason I want you to do that is because I want you to see that you have a lot of these gifts and skills already. Yeah, sure, for some of us, maybe if you're an introvert, you have to be more intentional about reaching out to support systems. Maybe if you're kind of a negative person, you need to be more intentional about rewriting that script. But I want you to take just a few minutes to think about that accomplishment and think about those P's and recognize how strong you are and what a good set of characteristics you already have. I see some nodding. So I'm hoping people realize how strong you already are. And I hope you realize how much fun it is to work on these characteristics and how ready you will be for whatever it is that might come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy, for this delightful presentation. It's a great example of what what Hartford Seminary can do and what you bring to this. So we're delighted. I'm David Grafton, the interim academic dean, and it's my privilege to open up the floor for questions and conversation. Somehow I knew Eileen would.
Oh, great.
Questions.
Yes. You didn't mention this, Tracy, but I know that this started with a retreat that you led. Could you speak to what that had to do with this and how that got it started and what happened with that?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I think some people end up leading retreats and workshops based on their books. I actually wrote a book based on the retreats and workshops that I was leading, and that's really where my heart and my passion is. So, as a student here at Hartford Seminary, I was trying to think of ministry projects. So when you're a Doctor of Ministry student, you create a project based on your ministry setting. And I said, well, I work in higher ed, and my students have a lot of hardship. It's amazing the extent of things that they are dealing with on a daily basis. Horrible, shocking things. So I said, maybe resilience is a thing, because the millennials and Gen Z are given a really hard time about not being resilient. We hear, oh, their helicopter parents set them up for failure, and they can't cope with anything. Well, I have found my students to be incredibly resilient, but I said, hey, this is clearly something we're talking about a lot in higher education, so let me do some research. So I created a weekend retreat based on this material. And from the beginning to the end of the weekend, the students reported a 45% increase in their self-identified levels of resilience. And it's not because I made them more resilient in the weekend, but it was because we did some practices and some strategies, and again, we helped them reflect on areas that they already have giftedness and support systems that they already have in place. And the students said, hey, I know next time I just need to call so-and-so. I know next time to do this. So they were able to look back at their experiences and realize how they might have dealt with it differently with tools that they already have in their toolbox. So that's what really inspired me to spread the news, if you would, because to me it's super interesting and exciting, and I don't want people to face hardship and say, what do I do? I want people to face hardship and say, okay, I need to call this person, I need to make sure I see my therapist, I need to make sure I go for a jog, I need to make sure, having those things in place so there's a sense of, yes, I know what I need to do. It doesn't make it easier, but it's more intentional. Anyone? Jim?
Sure, yeah. So as we spoke a few minutes earlier, Tracy, so I finished my Doctor of Ministry a year after she did, and I have my project, and I'm now set myself on a course to write a book from that. So say a little bit about the most fun challenge of getting from the final project thing to the book. What would you say some, I don't quite know what the question is. What was most challenging? What was most fun? What was like the turning point? You said, this is it. Or what, if there was something like that?
Oh, that's a good question. It took a lot of time, which I'm sure you could imagine, because it's just a lot of typing, but it was so incredibly therapeutic. And by far the highlight was reconnecting with these academy classmates, and also in doing so, I knew these women were amazing because I knew them from college and we were friends. But as they told their stories, they were so much more resilient than I even realized. There were parts of their stories that they had never shared with me. So it was such a gift to hear those stories. And also for me personally to writing the parts of my own story in there helped me make more sense of it and helped me own it in a new way, and that was really empowering. So this project really has changed how I look at a lot of things in terms of how I parent and how I interact with the world, and it just helped me come to peace with a lot of regrets, a lot of shame, and a lot of questions about what if things had been different, and letting go of some of those what ifs. That's part of the pliability piece.
So, did I hear then, Tracy, that there's more of you in the book than in the final project?
Yes.
Is that what I heard?
But not, I mean, yes, to some extent, yeah. I realize there are parts that you're like, that I may not have explained well enough in hindsight in the book. But I tried to be transparent, and I tried to be honest with my story, and I tried to just put it out there. And so...
It's a different audience when it's a book versus when it's a final project for your...
Yes, exactly, yeah.
And you didn't interview the Coast Guard for the project. That was just for the book.
Yes, good question, yeah. Yeah, that kind of came after. And that came... I just mentioned this to someone earlier. So I was thinking about this book, and I was thinking it was going to be it was going to have nothing to do with me. It was just going to be about resilience. It was going to be my workshop. And then I was looking on Facebook, and my friend posted about the anniversary of her daughter's stillbirth. She had a beautiful picture of her daughter and an amazingly heartfelt testimony about that day. And I realized in that very second, I was like, these are the stories that need to be told, because this makes the characteristic real. This shows you what the characteristic looks like in someone's life. And then when we see it in their lives, we can see it in our own lives more easily. So it started out as kind of like an academic book, turned into kind of like more of a therapeutic thing for me, so.
So you started out with the academic and did you know about the 7 identifiers and then be more inductive and qualitative with the people you interviewed, or was it simultaneous? Like, how did it emerge?
So my project had 6 Ps. So if you go to the library and look at it, it's only 6 Ps. So I came up with the 7th later. And I feel like I could have added more. Elsie said, well, what about patience? Wouldn't that be a good P? I was like, oh yeah, I should have had a patience chapter. But by then I had kind of run out of steam, and I was like, no, it's good. But what ended up happening was there were only about 30 women who graduated with me in my class, so there weren't that many women to choose from. I had 7 characteristics, but then it just came to me. It was just so obvious to me that all these women had all of these characteristics. But as you looked at those, you might say, oh yeah, that one's mine. That's the one I have that under control. I am strong in that area. Whatever that area might be. So it was just interesting that these women friends of mine just fell into these categories. And it was fortunate because it made it easier for me to figure it out. But that's really what happened. And that's why I think it's fun to look at those P's and say, yes, and say it like, yes, I have a really strong sense of purpose, or I'm really a positive person. Like, own those things, because that's what resilience is.
Microphone. Hi. I was wondering about your path to the ministry. If you could tell us a little bit about that. At what point did you know that would be your path? Was it during the academy? You had told me at one point that people always seem to confide in you, tell them your story, and I was just amazed at, all these people seem to be drawn to you for help, for guidance, or for confiding in you. So was there an aha moment in your life when you knew that would be your path?
Oh, these are such interesting questions. So I was working as a marine scientist in the private sector, and I had really a marine scientist dream job. I loved church, always. I grew up going to an amazing church and was really involved. But then there was a woman in our congregation who was hospitalized with end-stage cancer. And my parents were like, oh, you should really go visit her. She's in the hospital right across the street from your office. I was like, oh no, I can't possibly do that. And then I waited a few days and put it off, and then I said, literally, her hospital, I can see it almost from my office window, so I said, I'm just going to stop by. And I remember seeing her head was all wrapped in gauze, and we prayed together and had this moment, and I was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Just having that sacred moment with her. And I went to seminary thinking I would be a parish minister, because that was the model of ministry I was familiar with. And then once I was in seminary, I learned about chaplaincy, which is often done in a hospital, nursing home, prison, college, wherever. So it's really ministry, almost often an interfaith ministry. So that's kind of where that happened, just that one moment being with that woman.
Can I follow up on a question related to that? The theologian in me wants to ask, in this process, what did you learn about the human condition, and what did you learn about God?
Wow, nice. He was my professor. Yeah. He did give me an A in his class at least, so now I guess I can blow it. What I realized, again, is the strength of the human spirit, and many of these people that I interviewed or read about found a sense of being bolstered and upheld either by a divine presence or by the universe, and to me, it reminded me of, for me as a Christian, of God's companionship with me, that God doesn't prevent bad things from happening, but God is present in that moment. And consistently I heard from people that feeling of being upheld and supported. So in a way, it did renew my energy and my faith, because reading about people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a Lutheran minister who ended up speaking out against Nazism and ended up starting a church movement opposed to Nazism. He was eventually executed. Reading about his peace and his resilience and his perseverance, it just humbled me and said, well, if he can do it, I can do it with my everyday struggles, if he can do it in that circumstance. So I think definitely reading the stories of resilient people helps us trust that there's hope, and I think theologically that's what my faith is very, very closely related to hope. That I can't explain why this is happening, I don't know why this is happening, but I live in that with a sense of hope.
Did all of your people have this sense of spirituality? I guess
No, it's a good question. They, some, like I can think of one offhand specifically who's a very devout atheist, and during the very darkest moment in her journey, she was on an airplane, and the flight attendant was a Native American from the Native American tradition, and asked if she could pray with my friend, and prayed in her Native American tradition. And again, so here's a person who didn't necessarily connect with that faith, but connected with the empathy and with the hope and with the compassion that that woman showed. So I do feel like there was a sense of that spiritual connection. And again, I think we're all spiritual beings, even whether or not we identify as religious. So I think the spiritual piece is enormous when it comes to resilience. And if anyone wants to answer any of these questions with me, please.
I was just thinking about how beneficial I think this is to everybody, and just being able to find the resilience early on would help so many people. If you know ahead of time, okay, I can deal with this, and you're ready for it. Have you thought about, or would you be willing to modify or develop a speech or a talk for younger kids, like our kids' age, like, so that make it not religious, because obviously you can't in our school, but go in and basically sit with small groups or a larger group and just help them to realize, what they can do and what they already have, and to find that. Because I just think about myself, and I'm sure a lot of us feel the same way. If I would have known some of these things when I was younger, maybe I would have been able to deal with some of the issues that I had to face in a different way, It's like you have your tool bag, and then you go and you find help earlier instead of dealing with it alone, So I'm just thinking about, maybe it's the teacher in me, but just thinking about our kids, and I'm like, wow, in a different way, some different stories, obviously, but maybe this is something they benefit from, so it's just something to think about. I don't know, have you thought of that?
Well, I think of my own life and how haphazardly I managed difficulty for many, many years, and how I kind of realized that this person was there for me, and I kind of had this thing going for me, but there was no intentionality. But yes, even with my kids now, I'll be like, okay, problem solving, what you going to do about this? How are we going to fix this problem? You know, I even use that language, so I think it really could work well with any age.
Yeah.
I did a presentation at Winding Trails for resilience for the golden years, and it was all older adults, because the fact is, their health conditions are maybe deteriorating, their partners might be
Right, a lot of
ill,
change,
their
yeah.
friends might be moving to Florida, they may have just retired from their job. There's so many ways in which they kind of disconnect with these characteristics of resilience, and they need to be ready to reconnect and say, okay, well, this is changing, well, let me put something to fill that spot, because that isn't going to work for me anymore, because I moved to Florida, my congregation's in Connecticut, you know, or whatever the case might be. So yes, I think for any age, this is
I feel another book coming in the future.
Resilience for kids coming up, and then resilience for the golden years. Or for moms, when their kids get older. Resilience coming up.
Okay, over here. Did we have a question here? Yeah, one of the reasons why we're using the microphone, just so you know, that for YouTube world, so everyone on your YouTube channel can hear you for future reference.
Okay. Okay, actually, this question is not really, it can be out of this context, but I apologize for my curiosity. So I just want to ask you, do you picture yourself in the next 5, 2, or 3 years that you are going to do this kind of book talk, and what kind of book do you want to present?
So how I would like to present this material?
No, I mean, like, in the next 5 years, 3 years, or 2 years, do you picture yourself to be doing like this kind of book talk, but in another book? And so what kind of book do you want to present in that book talk?
Well, I often refer to this as my very first and last book. So I think it's like running a marathon. When you finish, you're like, I am never going to do that again. And then a few years later, you're like, maybe I can do a half marathon. Next thing you know, you're signed up for the Hartford Marathon. So, no, I love helping people find sources of hope and strength. And so I love that I'm able to do that at work as a Protestant chaplain. I love that I do that with my kids. I love that I do that sometimes with my friends. Like, to me, just helping connect with sources of hope is awesome. So any way that I can do that makes me happy.
Yep, question over here.
Here's one of my editors.
So statement and then a question. What I really liked about the book is at the end of every chapter, you have very practical questions that you ask the reader about what are you going to do to build resilience around this particular P. So for folks who haven't read the book, when you're asking what can you do to build resilience, Tracy has listed those at the end of each chapter. So I encourage you to get the book, which then my question is, Tracy, how might we buy the book tonight?
I did not plant him in there, but he must have done this before. No, yes, so in the end of each chapter, I have questions for reflection. And those are based on some of the conversations I've had with my students. You can do these with a therapist, you can do these with a small group, you can do this with a friend, you can do this in your journal. It invites you to look at this characteristic. How are you doing? Is it an area that could use some growth or strength, or is it an area that's pretty robust? Then it has strategies for improving that characteristic. And again, these are some of the things I did with my students on this weekend retreat and several other programs I've run, more workshop-y types of things. So for instance, with the people, I have my students share, well, name someone in your life with whom you can share anything and you can guarantee their unconditional love. And then we write thank you notes to those people. You know, and so I shouldn't put my parents on the spot, but I did participate in this exercise, and I wrote my parents a thank you note. And then when I got home, I saw that they had framed it, which was so sweet. And then I realized that, like, I don't do that often enough. I realized, you know what, why aren't we thanking people more often? I'm doing it only because I'm forced to, because I'm making my students do it. But why don't I do that more often? So anyway, then the third part at the end of each chapter is an interfaith prayer. And that is offered for you to take or leave. If it's meaningful to you, great. If you would like to adapt it for your own tradition, great. And if it doesn't mean anything to you, move on to the next chapter. But I thought for me that was kind of an important way of wrapping it up, to just say, understanding that ultimately we're not alone. We can't do this alone. So the point of that prayer is to just try to relinquish our control and ask for help from the universe, from God, from your friends, from whomever.
And the cost of the book and methods of payment are...
So I do. I'm getting very savvy now. I take Venmo. I take cash, check, or credit cards. And so the book, I'm always curious about this when I'm at a book talk, about, you can get it on Amazon for $17, so we're selling it for $15, because sometimes I'll check, I'll be like, wait, should I just get this on Amazon? But you'll get a little discount if you get it tonight. But
Maybe one more question here.
This is a good one to finish up with. I noticed you skipped the second to last slide.
oh, did I?
Were you going to give us homework?
Okay. Yes. I slid right by that slide, didn't I?
You did.
Yes. So the homework was to be more intentional than you were in that moment of just reflecting and really take a look. So with my students, what I do is I have them get in groups of 4 to 7, and they write on a piece of paper something that they're proud of, and they put it in the center. And then we mix them all up, and then someone will read it. Okay, this person put on a play at their high school, and blah, blah, blah. Or this person, it has survived a divorce from a partner, whatever the case is, we read them aloud, and then we all talk about the 7 Ps that went into it. So the people feel affirmed. They're like, someone else will be like, oh, I love how they relied on their friends to edit that book, or I love how they reached out to their pastor, or whatever. So it also helps the person look at their own accomplishment in a more objective way. And that's what I want us to do. It's like, we're so hard on ourselves. We're like, well, what have I done? Well, you each got here tonight. And if I made you think about the 7 Ps that went into you getting here tonight, it's pretty awesome. So when we talk about our accomplishments, big or small, it helps us recognize the fact that we're not starting from nothing. We're starting from quite a lot, and then we can also grow from that.
We'll give a student the last word. How's that? Okay?
I'm just curious, do you have another alternative titles for this book?
An alternative?
Book title.
Book
title, yes.
I had about 15 different book titles. And eventually, it was my church group, many of whom are here tonight, several of whom are here tonight, who helped me pick the final version. But originally, I wanted to call it Resilience for the 99%, with the idea of we're just everyday people. And we don't, okay, so I'm not an ultra marathoner, I didn't swim across the English Channel, I'm just a normal person. And I want this book to be accessible to just everybody, to just all of us, because most of us are not exceptional in a John McCain kind of way, or, in a Malala kind of way. We're just normal people. So that's what I originally kind of wanted to call it, but nobody had any idea what that meant, and it just took me 5 minutes to explain it, so we realized that was a bad idea.
Well, you have a great deal of resiliency, so I know there's at least 2 books coming later. So let's thank her for...
really do want to thank every single person here for being here tonight and for all of the different ways that you have supported me on this journey. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I seriously am so, so blessed. I just love you all. Thank you so much.
There are refreshments here, and there are books, so enjoy.